As a financial planner for real estate investors, a really common question that I get is, should I put my rental property into an LLC? There are a lot of common assumptions around this, including, everybody online says that I need one. It protects everything. You'll save taxes. Certainly, LLCs or limited liability companies can be very helpful, but they do create additional complexity, and in some cases, they're not necessary. Today on the Real Life Planning Podcast, I'm going to be breaking down what an LLC is, when it makes sense, and when higher insurance limits might be a simpler and smarter. Now, I'm not an attorney and I'm not going to give you legal advice. I would certainly encourage you to talk to a real estate attorney or a business attorney if you're thinking about putting your properties into a limited liability company. Think of this podcast as education. So let's talk about what a limited liability company is. In simple language, it's a legal entity. It's created under state law. So an LLC registration is state by state. The limited liability company or LLC can own assets, sign contracts, open bank accounts, and be sued separately from you personally in the event of litigation. You can think of it as a legal wrapper, if you will, around your property or properties, and if operated correctly, can provide some liability limits. So I think it's really important to clarify that an LLC is primarily a tool for legal protection. A lot of people get this backwards. So it's a tool for legal protections. It's not a tax saving strategy generally. An LLC is typically taxed as a pass-through, meaning that for tax purposes, let's say you and your spouse own your properties in an LLC, which is owned by you and your spouse. For tax purposes, it's just going to pass through to your Schedule E without a separate tax return in most cases. So again, not a tax-saving strategy in and of itself. It is designed for liability protection. An example, if your rental property is held in the LLC, the tenant is signing a lease with the LLC as opposed to with you directly as individuals. So why would somebody use an LLC in the first place? There are lots of good reasons to do that. So the core idea behind this is the isolation of liability. So if something happens at your rental property, if a tenant is injured or like a dog bite or they broke their leg falling down the stairs or something like that, and there is the possibility of a lawsuit, or if there's a dispute with a contractor, for example, the LLC may have the possibility of shielding your personal assets from a negative judgment in civil litigation. So let's be clear about this. Having an LLC doesn't protect you from doing something criminally. It's just if you have a civil judgment against you as the result of a lawsuit that your insurance did not cover completely, there are limits to that liability within the assets held in the limited liability company. It's important to know that this protection is not absolute. Courts have done what's called piercing the corporate veil if the LLC is not operated correctly by the owners or what are called the members of the LLC. So it's important if you're going to incorporate and put your properties in an LLC, it's important that you follow guidelines. The other thing that an LLC offers you is privacy. In some states, the ownership information about the LLC is not necessarily as public or discoverable. Instead of your personal name appearing in the property records, LLC name may appear. So if you own your properties in the name of Unicorn LLC, then when somebody does a search online, it will say Unicorn LLC is the property owner instead of your names personally in most states. But gotta check that state by state because privacy laws do vary state by state. And in most states, it is possible to go to the business registration website and see who owns the LLC. Another question that I often get around LLCs is, should I have all of my properties in one LLC or one LLC per property? In some states like Texas, it's common to use what's called a series LLC, which has some reduced reporting requirements for all the LLCs in the series. The goal in general is, by having an LLC, is to isolate risk and to prevent a lawsuit on one property from affecting multiple assets. And so there is a combination between owning your properties in an LLC and the types of insurance. Insurance covers limits that you have in terms of property and casualty and liability insurance. So important thing to know is every LLC has reporting requirements, filing fees, tax returns, bookkeeping, operations and administration. So the more individual companies that you own, the more operations activities that you have to do. And not keeping up with those reporting requirements can help that corporate veil or that liability protection be pierced or broken during litigation. So it is important that you keep your corporate formalities. Another important thing to remember is that if you own an asset within a limited liability company, let's say an apartment building, that apartment building is worth $2 million and it generates a good piece of your retirement income, the LLC protects your personal assets from being sued if something were to happen at that apartment building and you were found to be civilly at fault, or the LLC was found to be civilly at fault. Let's say there was a fire, for example. But it doesn't protect the income from that building unless you have additional insurance on that asset. So you still need to make sure that you have enough liability coverage or corporate umbrella liability with a policy within the LLC to protect the asset value within the LLC. Again, the LLC is a wrapper that prevents you from being sued personally. It prevents you from losing personal assets outside of the LLC in a civil judgment, but it doesn't prevent you from losing the asset in the LLC, which is why you also may need additional insurance for the property within the LLC. Let's talk a little bit about why operation matters a lot. You heard me say the term corporate formality. And so what that means is that even though LLC is simpler than a C corporation, you still need to operate it properly. The LLC has to have a separate bank account, separate credit card, separate accounting records, signed leases in the name of the LLC's name, or perhaps your property manager, depending on how that's working, proper contracts. You have to avoid mixing personal and business expenses. If you are contributing money to the LLC, you need to document capital inflows in and out in terms of owners' distributions, for example. And commingling funds definitely weakens the liability protection. So if you are treating your LLC like your personal wallet, the courts may just ignore it completely. A good LLC, and again, this is something you want to discuss with your attorney, but a good LLC has an operating agreement, files annually with the state, keeps up all their required books and records, has a registered agent, keeps regular books, has a digital folder or even a paper binder, all of those books and records and corporate formalities. This can help put you in the best possible position should there be litigation. So the LLC really only works if you respect the separation between you and the business. And so a lot of rental property investors put every single property into an LLC, but then they don't separate the financial operations, or they separate the financial operations, but they don't keep good records. And this could put them at risk in litigation. Just know that LLCs add to complexity. So there are some downsides and trade-offs. Obviously, on the upside is the liability protection. On the downside, mortgages do become a little bit more difficult. And that's because residential lenders in particular, so that kind of a single family home or small multifamily 2 to 4 doors, those lenders of conforming loans prefer to lend to individuals and not corporations. An LLC owned property may often require either a commercial loan or a higher interest rate, maybe a larger down payment or a shorter loan term, say shortening from 30 to 25 years, for example. If you have an existing mortgage on the property and you're transferring it into an LLC, you do need to be careful before you do this and check with your lender. Transferring property into the LLC might trigger the due on sale clause in the mortgage document. Historically, many lenders have ignored that in practice for small transfers, but you shouldn't make assumptions You should discuss it with your attorney and your lender before you transfer a property you already own into an LLC. In terms of financing and insurance complexity, if you move a property into an LLC, you will need to update your insurance policy and let your insurer know right away so you can change the named insureds on the policy. The LLC is generally going to be listed as an additional insured or named insured on the policy, and that when you renew, the LLC is the policy owner. Some mortgage lenders are going to require a personal guarantee from you anyway, which in the event of litigation could put you in less of a strong position. So when does it make sense not to use an LLC? A couple of situations, and again, I would discuss these all with your financial planner or tax preparer, with your legal counsel, for example. The first and most common reason is that you want to preserve what's called your Section 121 capital gains tax exclusion. An example of this would be you turned a home that you previously lived in into a rental property, and you haven't decided whether you're going to keep or sell that property. You're giving it as try as a rental, but you might sell it within 3 years after moving out. Now, if you did live in that property for 2 out of the past 5 years, single filers can take up to $250,000 in capital gains tax exclusion of the sale of a former primary residence, and married filing jointly at $500,000 in capital gains tax exclusion. And so if you're in that special situation where you turn your existing home into a rental property, you're not sure you're going to keep those funds continually invested in rental real estate, may make sense to wait on the LLC until you know for sure you're going to keep that property as a rental. So you don't want to lose those valuable tax benefits. A second reason to wait on an LLC for many small landlords is that you only own one small rental. In those cases, the complexity, the additional sets of books and records, it may not be worth it in terms of the time and effort if you're not really sure that you're building a real estate business yet. You're giving it a try with one rental. You want to see how it goes. It may be better to wait and just increase your liability coverage on your landlord policy and add umbrella liability insurance, or add your rental to your umbrella policy if you already have one. For some investors, a $1 to $2 million umbrella policy may accomplish more practical protection than a poorly maintained limited liability company. So it's definitely something to discuss. I would say if you work in a profession where you're often the target for lawsuits, I think physicians or dentists are a good example of that, maybe tech employees, then it might make sense to start with an LLC from the get-go. If you have a very high net worth, it might make sense to handle it in an LLC. Again, it's a personal decision, but you don't necessarily need to jump in that right away. So just to recap, in closing, an LLC can help with asset protection, privacy, organizational structure, but it also requires proper operations, separate finance, some additional costs, more complex financing scenarios. My takeaway for you is that the LLC, or the limited liability company, is a tool, but it's not a requirement. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. Before transferring properties into an LLC, definitely coordinate with your CPA, your attorney, your insurance agent, your lender, so that all the legal, tax, and financing pieces work together to help you build and scale your real estate business. If you found this useful, leave us a and let us know in the comments if there are any other questions you'd like us to tackle on the Real Life Planning Podcast.